Yeah, well, wait a second. If you are watching us on Chabad.org or on my personal page, say hi. So we can say hi to you. Pretty. Ask so nicely, right? I'm very nice. You see me? Chat. Let me know you can see me. Um, let's see who. Oh, chat. I see Kim saying hello, Rabbi. Hello, Kim. Okay. Oh, Art is saying hello from me. Hello, Cookie, but it's okay. More. Pass me one. If there's extras, thank you. Okay, ready? If anyone else is watching, feel free to say so. Shira is on and Mos is on. Okay. Hello, Barbara. Hello, Sadal. Hello, Dave. Hello, Steve. Hello, Michelle. Hello, Esther. Rick is coming, you said, right? Rick is coming, but we'll still start. Okay. No one else is chatting to me online. Okay. So let's start, I guess. Now that Lori is watching and our my screen. So tonight's learning, as always, is dedicated in the memory of Yitzchak ben Yosef and the elevation of his soul. Tonight we are going to talk about Zimri. Scholar and resident. Okay, so I will tell you about Zimri and about the way we deal with Zimri, more importantly. But first, you need to know the context, because without appreciating what's going on in the story, you're not going to appreciate the story, right? So the story is not a very happy story for the Jewish people. We are at the plains of Moab. We are about to enter into the land of Israel. We're literally on the other side on the east side of the Jordan River, and we're going to cross the Jordan and to Moses has fought these tremendous wars against the king of the Amorim, a man called Sichon, a giant, and killed him. He's fought a war against Og. Og was a giant who was the king of Bashan. He destroys him. These enemies, these nations that were on the east side of the Jordan that were protecting the land of Canaan, which were even more powerful. These two kings that were brothers and they were giants. Og was a remnant from before the flood. He was so big that Moses chopped off his ankle at 45 feet in the air. We don't get the whole story now. We've done a whole class on Og last year, 2 years ago. But anyway, these wars are won. There's nothing stopping the Jews from entering. Not petrified of the Jews coming in. And there's a king called Balak who hears about the Jews very, very much. So Yohan called Bilam, non-Jewish sorcerer. Good evening, Rick. He's a non-Jewish sorcerer that had a spirit of black to curse the Jewish people. His curses do not work. And one of the good classes. We'll do reruns one day, maybe. He was a man who knew but didn't believe in God. Anyway, but after he attempts several times to curse the Jews unsuccessfully, he says to the king of Moab, I'll give you advice. The Jews, but I know what makes their God really, really angry. If you can and you can get them to go against the morals and the values of Judaism and sexual sins, and then they'll become weak and they'll also commit idolatry, their God will punish them for you.
And so, smart. He was a smart man. That is correct. He was a smart man. Let me just check the microphone here. He was indeed a smart man. And Moab, change the microphone.
Of course, to the advice of, and here's the following plan that he does. 1 second. He sets up a Okay, 1 second. This is good. Okay, Baruch Hashem. So he follows the advice of Bilam, and he sets up a huge bazaar. What always gets Jews in? Good evening, everyone that's watching. Good evening, William and Carmen and Gail. What's the best way to get a Jew? Food, okay. Food and a sale. A sale, right? Every Jew loves a sale. But how does a Jew? You ask a Jew how much you pay for something, he can't give you a straight answer. It was $55. Right? It's, you know how much I paid for it, right? Every Jew is on sale. So they make this huge bazaar. And in fact, the Moabites get the Midianites, because they were actually, the king Balak was from Midian, but they were on the plains of Moab. So the Moabites allow the Midianites to come into their land, the Jews to sin. They set up right outside where the Jews are camped, this huge bazaar, colorful tents. And the Jews say, okay. They finish their meal. They said, let's go over and see what's going on. What are they selling next door? So the Jews come. And in the front, outside of the tent, they have these old women selling whatever shmatas they're selling. Tchotchkes. You know what tchotchkes are? Yeah, you're aware of tchotchkes. Shmatas and tchotchkes. Some tents have tchotchkes and some have shmatas. You know? So they go, they look, and of course, the Jews start bargaining. You can't just pay full price. That would be a sin, you know. That's what, you know, this is what we retail for the non-Jews. So the Jews not going to pay full price. They start negotiating. And the old ladies outside say, well, these prices I can't lower. But if you go inside, they have the back. That's where the sales are. We always like the back room, right? Every apartment has the back room. That's where the sales are. So they go inside. And inside is not an old lady. It's a very pretty young lady. Very seductively dressed. And they start to talk to the Jews that came inside the tents and start to flirt with them, get them excited, and they try to seduce them. And the Jews are pretty strong. So, as you said, it's food. So Steve said, Snell said food. Got to give food. Food always works. But the Jews were worried it's not kosher. In the meantime, at that time, the wine of a non-Jew was biblically the wine. And so they had some very, very strong wine ready, and the Jews started to drink the wine, and they ate the food, and next thing you know, and they wanted to be intimate with these ladies trying to sell their wares, selling, and the girls called the they are intimate girls, and of course God is angry. Yeah, I wouldn't say it like that, but yeah, he's pretty angry. And God tells Moses to punish the Jewish people. Now Moses doesn't know who's who. How is Moses supposed to know which Jews had actually engaged in forbidden immoral sins in the back of the tent? There were no witnesses. That was a whole setup where they were going to get a good deal, and then inside the pretty girls were there with the wine. The next thing, so God says, I'm going to help you. Because there's no witnesses to make a proper trial. And the clouds of glory opened up above those that had committed sins in the secrecy of the tents. They thought they were sinning in secret. No one could see them. The clouds of glory that were protecting the Jews opened just over the heads of those that had sinned. And so the sun was shining, exposing the sins of those that had been immoral. And Moses had to see the sun was shining on this guy's head, and they started sweating. You know, I can imagine why. And they were for having behaved immorally in what they thought was secret. Now, many of the people that sinned were from the non-Jews that had joined the Jews, but many were also from the tribe of Shimon. Shimon was known to the tribe of kosher, if you eat kosher and non-Jewish wine. Anyway, but so they come to their prince, to their leader. His name was Zimri. That's the guy we've been talking about tonight. They come to Zimri, you got to do something for us. You got to stand up for us. This is not okay. So he decides he's going to do something. What does he do? He goes to Cosbi. Cosbi is the daughter of Tsur, who is the king of Midian. Now, the king of Midian was so desperate to destroy them through sin that he gave a job to his own daughter, who was obviously very, very beautiful, that she should seduce Moses himself. That was a job. Now you have to understand what kind of people we're dealing with. Where the kid his own daughter into a prostitute, takes his own daughter. I want you to go seduce Moses to tempt him to get him to sin. So the prince of the tribe of Shimon, his name is Midianite Prince Cosby, and says to me, I'm more important than Moshe. And she says, sorry, the only Jew I'm going to be is the job my father gave me. So he tries to convince her that he's actually more important than Moses. Why? Because Moses, Levi, count the hierarchy of the tribes in her mind. Reuben is the first, Shimon, then comes Levi. So the prince of Shimon, who's tribe number 2, important than Moses, who's only from tribe number 3. So smart, yeah, not to manipulate the situation. So he says, I'll show you. Come with me, and I'll take you not in the secret in the tent behind the bazaar. I'll take you in front of all the Jewish people. Now, he had to make a statement, to show off for his people, but also to embarrass Moses. So he takes Cosby from the camp of the Midianites. He publicly and proudly and defiantly brings her into the Jewish camp. Can you imagine the act of in Moses' face? And it gets worse. So let's read let me share my screen for those that are watching on my personal page. 1 second. Here we go. We are going to read from the end of this week's Torah reading, towards the end of the last Aliyah, verse number 6, chapter 24. Then an Israelite man came. His name is Zimri. We'll see later. And he brought the Midianite woman to his brethren before the eyes of Moses and before the eyes of weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Very man brings a woman in front of all the people and they're all weeping. What's going on? Rashi, of course, tells us who is the Israelite man? The tribe of Shimon gathered around Zimri, who was their prince. And they said to him, we have been sentenced to death. Yet you sit there and you remain silent, etc. And there's the whole story. The Talmud and Sanhedrin go through a lot more detail. So he has to respond. So he takes the Midianite woman, you see in verse 15, takes him before. What does that mean? Talmud tells us a very, very interesting dialogue. They say to him, or he says to him, Moses, is this girl, Cosby, is she permitted, or forbidden, or is she permitted? Forbidden. Permitted for you, the daughter of Yisro, of Jethro, who is also a Midianite. Who is it? Zipporah. Zipporah is the daughter of Yisro, who was a prince of Midian, Kohen Midian. So if you're going to tell me that this princess Cosby you need to be intimate with, hold on, who's your wife? Zipporah, a Midianite. How dare you tell me she's forbidden? What about your wife should also be forbidden to you? Now, Moshe is being attacked over here. This is not, I'm going to defend you. This is straight up. He brings this, obviously probably very scantily clad Midianite princess with all people behind her into the camp in front of Moshe and says, Moshe, I have a question, Rabbi. Is this girl permitted to be or forbidden to be? Like, that's, obviously, like, man, in the middle of the services, the guy stands up with his non-Jewish girlfriend, Rabbi, in front of everyone. So Moshe, everyone's weeping. Why is everyone weeping? The Torah says they were weeping at that moment. Nis alma mimenu halacha. The law was hidden from him, from Moses. And Moses did not know how to respond. And because he didn't know how to respond, everyone burst out weeping until Pinchas came out. I will stop there for a moment. Okay, so here we have the scene. We have the scene, and it's quite a dramatic scene. Many Jews have been put to death for the sin of being intimate with these Midianite girls shopping. They were out shopping, they were drinking wine and eating in the back of the tent. The sun shone on them, they were killed. Zimri brings this girl into the tent, into the camp. At the entrance of the Mishkan, he says to Moshe, is she permitted or forbidden? And if you say she's forbidden, also Midianite. Moshe is the Jews sinned with the golden calf. He came down and broke the golden calf. This is the Moshe that argued with God. And now, because it's personal, and because Moshe has nothing to respond, all the other leaders of the Jewish people have nothing to respond. And so they're all just standing there, speechless, and Zimri argument. Moshe basically, and Zimri takes this woman with him into his tent. Show her the furniture. Not to show. They went in. The tribe of Shimon erects guards around the tent to protect him. So no one should do anything. And camps and speechless. Quiet. At that moment, a plague erupts amongst the Jewish people. God is, needless to say, if you thought he was pissed before, he's really angry now. And a plague begins. There was a man watching. Good evening, everyone that's watching. There was another man watching, not on Facebook, he was watching it really live. His name was Pinchas. Pinchas sees what's going on. In that moment, Pinchas is aroused. God is being embarrassed. Everyone's being embarrassed. What happens? So let's go back to reading the next verse. Torah continues in verse number 7 on the screen for those on my page. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, he saw this and took a spear. What does it mean he saw? He saw what the deed of Zimri reminded himself of a law. Learn from you, if someone is cohabiting with an Aramean woman, a heathen woman, forbidden woman, a zealot has the right to strike him dead at the sin. This is the rule. They don't teach it publicly. In yeshiva, they don't teach this halacha, this law. And if you go to the rabbi not to kill the through a court, if at the moment of the sin, someone sees a person committing a sin with a forbidden non-Jewish woman, and at that moment he's allowed to. So says Moses, that we're allowed to kill on the spot. So like, why are you not doing anything? So Moshe responds to Pinchas, let the one who be, meaning you're the one that remembered it. So obviously this is the mitzvah that comes to you. You feel it burn, and you go and kill these two people that are. Immediately, he took a spear in his hand and he went into the tent. Okay, he went to the tent. Now, we did a whole class on Pinchas as well. I think I already mentioned that. But what happens? Many miracles happen. Many miracles. So first of all, he couldn't get in. The Medrash on this is fascinating. The Medrash says that Pinchas didn't know what to do. He wanted to go, but there were guards from the tribe of Shimon guarding the tent. So he had to get in. So he had to pretend like he was part of them. So he says to the guards, let me enter. You think only Zimri is entitled to a Midianite girl? My family also likes Midianite girls. He comes from the family of Moshe, from Aaron. Let me go also a chance. So since he wants a chance, he's be even big to Moses. If his own is going to be involved in this sin, he's a grandson of Aaron. He's a great nephew of Moses. So he said, I want a chance too. I want to join the party, make it a threesome. So they let him in. That was how he pretended to go in. The moment again, he had a spear hidden under his cloak. The pointy part was hidden in his cloak, and he used the spear of it like a walking stick. He walks in with his walking stick, and they were intimate at that moment. They were together. Their bodies were together. Their organs were together. He took the spear out, and God made a miracle. This says in the Medrash 12 miracles happened. I won't go through all 12, but one of the miracles is that the metal of the spear got long enough to pierce through both bodies simultaneously. So the one spear went all the way through, I don't know who was, I guess whoever at the bottom, all the way through, speared the next person, that they remained stuck on the spear. They couldn't get off the spear. He lifted the spear up in the air with two people on it. Two people. God gave him a miracle that he had the strength to carry a spear that didn't break, and his arm was strong enough to hold two people impaled on the miraculously elongated metal of the spear. They did not die. Because if they would die, he'd become ritually impure. He wanted to become a Kohen. so they couldn't become dead. So they remained alive. They didn't even bleed on him, even though they were impaled by a spear. 12 miracles. He carries them out of the tent so that everyone can see that at the moment that he killed them justifiably because they had been actually involved in the sin. Because the moment they're not involved in the sin, you can't be a zealot and avenge what you feel is the honor of God. Then you have to go through the judicial system and go to the court and find witnesses and testimony and the whole process, the due process of a legal system. You can only be a zealot at the actual moment of sin. So he shows the whole assembled congregation that they were having a sin. Their bodies are together, impaled by this spear, and then he throws them onto the ground. They die, and the plague stops. Very dramatic story. They're dead on the floor. The plague stops, and then the Torah tells us that who was this? I don't know the secret, but I want you to see what the Torah says. Who was the name of this Israelite man who was killed? Verse 14, who was slain with the Midianite woman. His name was Zimri ben Salu. Zimri, the son of Salu, the chief of the paternal house of Shimon. And why do we know who this was? So Rashi tells us, in the place where Scripture traces the lineage of the righteous man for praise, because the Torah told us that Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron HaKohen, giving praise to the righteous who defended the honor and the glory of God. So to over here, it traces the lineage of the wicked man for shame. So the Torah is telling us the story of Zimri because Zimri's name is meant to go down in shame, in embarrassment for having publicly committed such a terrible act against God. And this will finish off. This shows a praise of Pinchas, that even though Zimri was a chief, he did not refrain from acting zealously against a profanation of the divine name, which is why Scripture tells us the name of the one who was slain, to show he was a very important person, and yet Pinchas was not afraid to this important person to avenge the honor of God. Okay, that, my friends, is the story. Interesting story, right? Interesting indeed. Such stories, you don't even need a joke, because the story itself is a... So, I want to ask you a simple question. The Torah is telling us over here that this man Zimri, his name is associated with shame, and yet it's also telling us that he's a great man. He's a chief, the leader of the tribe of Shimon, which is part of the praise of Pinchas, that Pinchas didn't resist from going to kill this person, even though he was a leader of the Jewish people. So he was a leader, a wise man, a smart man, who felt he had to avenge the honor of his tribe, and yet he had to be killed by Pinchas. So I'm going to ask you a very simple question. The answer might get complicated, but it's a very simple... Let me do this. Here's the question. Let's go back to what was Zimri's argument against Moshe. When Zimri brought this Midianite woman into the tent, go back. When Zimri brought this Midianite woman into the congregation at the entrance to the Mishkan, what to Moses? What did we read before? He says to Moses, tell me, is this woman permitted to me or forbidden for me? And if you say she's forbidden, who allowed you to marry the daughter of Yisro from Midian? They're both Midianite girls. So either your Midianite girl is good enough for you, then my Midianite girl is good for you, or not. Isn't that a very, very simple answer to this argument? No, you think it's a good argument?
Moses is married to her. He was just using her as a...
You're right. So Moses married her legally years ago, and he's not marrying her at all. He's just having fun with her as a prostitute. Torah hadn't been given you. Very smart. Very good, Michelle. Thank you. When did Moses marry Tzipporah? Years before the Torah was given. Years before the Torah was given. Was there any sin before the Torah was given for Moses to marry Tzipporah? No, there was no Torah. And by the way, every single Jew that stood at Mount Sinai went through a conversion process. All the Jews had to convert. I mean, I'm not going to go through the details now, but we went through the mikvah, we brought on the 5th day of Sivan. We got on the 6th day. On the 5th day, we declared Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and whatever God says, we accept. and we brought offerings, sacrifices, and we went to the mikvah, and we had the blood of the offering on us. So and the Jews were circumcised already before then. So every single Jew went through a conversion process. And Tzipora was there, according to most commentaries anyway, according to Rashi. Tzipora was there at Mount Sinai. So Tzipora went through a conversion. So let's take for granted now, the Rebbe has a beautiful one. Everything I'm going to say to you now is from a talk of the Rebbe about this question. But let's assume that he remarries her the way, because if two converts, let's even a couple is married, and they both go through a conversion. So now that they're Jewish, they need to go through a Jewish wedding. So Moses remarries Tzipora again after the giving of the Torah. She's a Jewish girl now. So the question, the argument, the claim against Moses, it's a very weak, very, very weak claim. It's baseless. Oh, Sadell has an excellent question, which was about to be my very next question. If it's such an obvious answer, I don't say that even Michelle figured out, because I don't make it sound like Michelle is not so smart, but even Michelle figured it out. Like, you don't need to be Moses or Zimri, the prince of the tribe, to figure out that what are you comparing this prostitute, this girl that you just took now off the street to make a statement against Moses, to a girl that, yes, she was originally Midianite, who was married before the Torah was given, and then who went through the conversion process at Mount Sinai, was married according to Jewish law. How are they comparable? It's not comparable, right? So it seems like the argument of Zimri is a stupid argument. So much so, Sadell wants to know, why didn't Moses just say, buddy, I married her, she went through a conversion. She's converted. That'd be a pretty easy answer. Steve agrees. Okay. You'll notice, by the way, that even Pinchas doesn't respond to the logical fallacy of Zimri's argument against Moshe. All that Pinchas says to Moshe is, didn't we learn the law that if we see a man engaging in an immoral act with a forbidden non-Jewish woman, we're allowed to avenge the honor of God and to kill the person? And Moshe says, you're right, that's the law. You read the letter, you go act it out. So Pinchas doesn't think of the simple halacha that she's not comparable, she went through conversion. Moses doesn't think of it. Like, what was Zimri thinking? Like, why do you even ask such a stupid question that should be so easily answered? So we really need to understand what is Zimri's agenda over here. What's he trying to say? And remember, Zimri is the chief of the tribe of Shimon. The Torah is telling us he was a great man. So he wasn't an idiot asking stupid questions. He was a smart man. So there has to be some wisdom to the question. You guys ready for what? What? Oh, if you saw the wisdom. All of you that are watching online, hello. The prayers for Don, learning his merit for help. You should be healthy, Mary. You all understand the question? The question is very obvious, very clear, right? The question is, what's the question? The question is, what is the argument? What's the claim of Zimri? It seems like the stupidest argument to make. Okay. So let me give you a little bit of halacha here, a little bit of all from the Rebbe, some Talmudic wisdom. And then we're going to see also the ultimate why Moshe didn't answer, and then the ultimate lesson for us why Moshe doesn't answer. There's a halacha that a Kohen is not allowed to marry a convert. Why is a Kohen not allowed to marry a convert? Because this is a biblical law. Because the Torah says that a Kohen can't marry a divorcee. He can't marry a woman that was a prostitute, a zona. And so a woman that comes from a non-Jewish environment, like the Midianites, is assumed to have been immoral in a previous lifetime. Therefore, she has a presumed status of being not a virgin, not a proper woman, and the priest cannot marry this woman. Now, is Moshe a priest or is he a Levite? Well, Moshe lost the priesthood, but there's two opinions in the Talmud, whether or not he lost it or only his children lost it. It was only taken away from his descendants. Even if you say that he lost it, he only lost it temporarily. How do I know that? Because who served as the priest during the 7 days of inauguration while Aaron and his sons were being initiated as the priests? Moses. Moses was the one, correct. Those that haven't studied the Torah are familiar with this. For 7 days, Moses was the priest doing all of the service in the Mishkan. He put up the walls. He anointed all the vessels. He dressed Aaron and his sons. He did their offerings for them as if he was the priest and they were the petitioners. They were the Jews for 7 days. And then on the 8th day, he did it again. And finally, on the 8th day, then after Moses did all of the service, and Aaron felt embarrassed that God's presence had not yet been revealed, they went into the actual building of the Mishkan itself to bring the incense. And that's when the Shekhinah came down and God's presence was revealed. So Moshe undoubtedly served as the priest, the Kohen of the Jewish people. And again, there's two opinions. Some say he was always a priest because God had actually called him a priest at the burning bush. And either only his children were punished. He was punished that his children wouldn't carry in his ways, which indeed happened, that Moshe's children didn't carry on, or he lost it and he had it back temporarily. But either way, Moshe himself serves as a priest. So the question of Zimri is not a question about the fact that she was a non-Jewish woman. You have a Kohen status. You're trying to say to me, to Zimri, that she's not permitted, this girl. Why? Because she comes from an immoral background. But you're a Kohen, and your wife also comes from Midian, which is an immoral background. So you did the same thing. You understand? It's not a stupid question. It's a halachically solid question. But is that clear? The question of Zimri is not about a regular girl. It's unique to Moses. Moses, you're a priest. You're supposed to be at a higher standard where you don't have a girl who comes from an immoral background. That's why priests are held to a higher standard than the rest of the Jewish people. And you're not acting up to your standard. So why are you expecting us of a standard that you yourself are not holding up to? It's a good question. So what's indeed the answer? How could Moshe be married to Tzipporah?
He wasn't a priest.
He was a priest. He was a priest. So I'm going to give you two answers. One is a simple answer on facts, and one's a halacha answer. Which one should we do first? Simple. Simple answer. Okay. Who remembers? It's good that you guys are scholars in this room, and I hope all you watching are also scholars. Who remembers when Miriam spoke lashon hara? She spoke evil about her brother, and she got saras. She got a form of leprosy for speaking bad about her brother. Remember that story? What evil gossip was she saying about her brother? No one remembers? Come on, Robert. What was the gossip that Miriam said to her brother Aaron about Moses?
Because he separated from her.
Do you remember? I'll say this for the rest of you. There were 72 elders that were hired. They're chosen by Moses to represent the Jewish people. The Jewish people complained to God for meat, and Moses couldn't handle the complaints. He says to God, where I get meat from, kill me first. And God says, okay, I'm going to give you elders to help you. We did a class on the elders just, 2 months ago. Remember that? So there were 72 elders. 70 were chosen by God. They did a raffle. And 2 were left behind in the camp because they were not from the 70 elders. But there's 6 men from each of the 12 tribes. So there's 72 men. The 2 men that were from the 72, 6 from each tribe, but weren't part of the 70, were Eldad and Medad. Eldad and Medad stayed behind in the camp. They were prophesying that Moses would die, and Joshua would be the one to lead the Jews into the promised land. And when Miriam heard these heard these 2 men prophesying, she turns to her brother Moshe. She was standing next to Tzipporah. Miriam was standing next to Tzipporah. And Tzipporah says to her sister Miriam, to her sister-in-law Miriam, woe to the wives of these women. These prophets. I'm getting confused. Woe to the wives of these prophets, because now that their husbands have become prophets, they will separate from their wives the way my husband separated from me. And in fact, Rashi says that he divorced his wife. That's the words used by Rashi. He divorced her because since he would always be present and God would speak to him, so therefore he had to be always in a state of spiritual purity. So he separated from his wife. So Miriam didn't like that her brother had separated from his wife, so she went to go to the big brother Aaron to tell Aaron, and that's why God came and said, everything that Moses does is right. It came from me. That's why she got punished. But what's the point of this story? Why am I sharing this story with you now? Why am I sharing this story with you now? Why is it important for us to know that Tzipporah, the wife of Moshe, had told her sister-in-law Miriam that her and Moses were separated or divorced, according to Rashi? Because when Zimri comes to Moses and says, who allowed you to marry Zipporah? He should have given a simple answer. I'm divorced from her. We already learned the story that Moses and Zipporah were not living together. So Zimri is coming to Moshe like a big hotshot. Hey, Moses, who allowed you to be with Zipporah? She's a Midianite girl. Moses could have said, you're right. I'm not with her anymore. He wasn't. He separated from her. He permanently separated. Rashi uses the word divorce. I actually had copied the Rashi to put in the text. I'm not going to bother reading it inside. It's not in the text, but I actually had copied it. The words of Rashi are he divorced her. The point is, the reality is such that Moses and Zipporah were not together. So theoretically, Moses could have answered Zimri's question very simply by saying, we're not married anymore. So why does he not say that? Because it was a secret. Did anybody know about Moses' private life? Did his own brother and sister know? No. Miriam only found out because Zipporah made a comment to her when she heard Eldad and Medad prophesizing. So Zipporah found out. So Miriam found out. She went to go tell her brother. And God got angry at her for saying anything. So Moshe should start speaking about his personal marital life. Moshe's not going to speak. You understand? Story makes sense. Zimri is challenging Moshe on the fact that he has a wife from Midian. The truth is that Moshe had separated from his wife from Midian. But it doesn't say anything because it's private. And no one else could say anything. None of the other leaders of the tribes that were there could say anything because they didn't know. So we understand the argument of Zimri. And we understand why Moses is speechless because he doesn't want to share private, personal information about his own marital life to all the Jewish people. It's brilliant, right? Yes, you all with me? Maybe? Feeling the... Okay, you're not convinced. I'll give you the other... yeah?
Convinced because he was still with Zipporah, still married her, still
Okay.
with her, still had
Okay.
children with her.
So I have the other answer that Moshe could have given. The halacha answer. Okay, the halacha answer. The halacha is that let's say a Kohen marries a widow. Now, a Kohen can't marry a divorcee or a prostitute, which is a convert, but he could marry a widow. Okay? A Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is not even allowed to marry a widow. What happens if a Kohen, a regular priest, marries a widow, and then after he's married to the widow, he becomes the high priest? Does he have to divorce his wife that was a widow now that he became the high priest? Rick says no. He did it when it was permitted. When he married her in a permitted state, so the Kiddushin was valid. The fact that now we're changing his status to a high priest does not take away the validity of what was done that was kosher when it was done. Right? It's like if a person goes through a proper halacha conversion and then after they stop being religious, if at the time they were religious and it's done properly, it's done properly. It remains proper. So the point is that when that when Moshe married Zipporah, he married her. Was he the priest yet? When did Moshe become the priest? When they inaugurated the Mishkan. That was after the golden calf, after 6 months later till they built it, till the month of Nisan. Almost a full year after they went through the conversion and he remarried Zipporah. So this is based on the words ki yikach. It's the words from the Gemara and Yevamos is not relevant for our conversation to explain how you learn this out. But the point is that the way we interpret, the way the rabbis interpret the word ki yikach, that the man will take the woman for his wife, or the Kohen Gadol taking this woman, is that as long as when he took her, she was permitted to be taken, it remains valid even later. So Moshe could have answered Zimri. Zimri's asking a question: how could you, as the Kohen Gadol or as a Kohen, be married to this convert? You could have answered that based on the way we interpret the verse, when did I marry her? When it was permitted. The fact that later I became a priest I already had validity from before, so it remains binding. You understand what he should have answered? The problem is, he'll be answering a rabbinic interpretation of a verse which had not yet been taught. And now he is what we call, he's biased. He's negea b'davar. Moses says to Zimri, you have a good question. Let me explain to you how to read the verse. If you take the woman, when you took it, when it was permitted, he starts giving a whole explanation how to interpret the verse. Is that legitimate? It's a little bit biased over there. It's a little bit tainted. So Zimri's asking a question from a biblical law. The biblical law is that the priest can't marry the convert. So Moshe is going to answer with a rabbinic interpretation that says that when he married her, he was allowed to marry her, so it remains a marriage even after she becomes forbidden. So a rabbinic interpretation had not yet been taught by Moses, who's being challenged, is not going to work. So no one else can answer because they didn't know the interpretation of the verse. Moses can answer because he's being challenged, so he remains quiet. Okay? I've given you now, from the Rebbe, 2 Talmudic explanations for this story. We understand why Zimri is not an idiot for asking the question. It's a good question. He's not asking, how could you marry a Midianite? She went through conversion, no duh. We're talking specifically about Moses and the status as a Kohen, and why Moses was allowed to marry her. 2 different reasons, but why he couldn't give those answers. One, because it was personal and private and nobody else knew about his own personal marriage. And one, because the explanation why it's permitted is based on rabbinic interpretation of a verse that had not yet been explained publicly, and Moses will look very biased by explaining the verse in his favor. Okay, everything makes sense, Talmudically, scholarly, etc. But we need to find the meaning in the Bible. I want to tell you, well, I'm going to tell you now also the Rebbe, it's not my idea, a much more simple understanding of why Moses does not answer Zimri. Much more simple, and also much more practical. Very practical. Super practical. Okay? You want to know the answer? I'll start with a question. How's that? For fun. King Solomon, let's go look at text number 4. King Solomon wrote a very wise book called Proverbs. Yeah, you ever heard of it? So in Proverbs, King Solomon, I hope everyone that's watching online is following along the wisdom here. King Solomon writes in chapter 26, is it? Of Proverbs, verse number 4, do not answer full according to his folly, lest even you become like him. And then he says in verse number 5, answer full according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes, in his own sight. So verse number 4 says, don't answer full according to his foolishness, because then you'll be foolish like him. Verse number 5 says, answer a fool according to his foolishness, so he doesn't think that he's right. So which one is it? Should you answer a fool or should you not answer a fool? When should you answer the fool with his foolish arguments? And when should you not answer the fool according to his foolish arguments? And the Rebbe gives a beautiful, simple, and practical answer. It depends what the question is. Is there ever a bad question? If the question is not being asked for an answer. Sometimes the person's asking a question because they don't know. They want to know. They're looking to understand. And then we have an obligation to answer the question, even if it's foolish, even if the question makes no sense, even if you're an idiot, but you care, you're sincere. As long as you're sincere and you desire to understand, we have an obligation to answer until you understand. If the question is not for the sake of understanding, the question is for the sake of justifying my own evil, my own desires, I'm challenging not because I want an explanation, but I'm challenging because I want a challenge, then you don't answer. Zimri was challenging not for the sake of understanding why Moshe was marrying Zipporah. He couldn't care less about Zipporah. Zimri's asking a question because Zimri wants to commit a sin. Zimri wants to indulge with this very pretty Midianite princess. So to justify his sin, his temptation, he found a question. He found a legal argument against Moses. But the question is not because he cares. He's not going to be answered because he's not looking for the answer. He's not looking for the answer. To say a story about this rabbi whose student came up with so many questions on God and religion and all that. And the rabbi didn't answer him. So he left. Went away, he went his own. Years later, the student met the rabbi. And the rabbi said, remember years ago we had all these questions? And the rabbi started to give answers to all of his questions. So he says, so if you knew the answer, like, why didn't you answer me? I thought that I had stumped you. I thought you didn't have an answer. So the rabbi says to him, I didn't answer you because I can only answer a question. I can't give an answer to an answer. Your questions weren't questions. Your questions were answers to yourself why you were breaking the rules of Judaism. You were not looking for an explanation for Judaism. You weren't asking because you had a question. Your questions were answers to your own guilt, to your own feeling of validating your desire to indulge in sin and temptation. So if you were asking to answer yourself, how could I answer your answer? You understand? There's two kinds of questions. And it's very important to know the difference. It's very important to know one is a question because someone cares, and one is a challenge because I want to fight you, because I want to prove you wrong, not because I want to find out what you think. So what's the relevance for today? What's the relevance for today? Today we live in a time when the world is full of questions against the Jewish people. Full of questions. How could Israel kill so many innocent civilians so many quote unquote innocent civilians in Gaza? Where's the human justice rights? Where's the compassion? Where's the Jewish values? And so when an anti-Semite asks, how could Israel kill so many innocent civilians? You have to understand who we're talking to over here. You have to understand who is the questioner. Not what is the question, but who is the questioner. The very famous thing, I actually meant to say it, I forgot. That you answer, the very famous line, right? You've all heard it. Answer the questioner, not the question. Correct? Answer the questioner, not the question. So when a Holocaust survivor asks me, where was God during the Holocaust? Are they asking a theological question that they want an intellectual answer to? No. They're asking an emotional question from pain. So the answer has to be an emotional response of empathy and of care and of love and of understanding. Not an intellectual answer that God is very great, so he's hidden. That's not going to answer the question, because that's not the question. You got to figure out what is the person really asking. Not what are they saying that they're asking, what are they really asking? So when someone says, how could Israel bomb schools? How could Israel, whatever the argument is. And they come like Zimri. Zimri didn't just say, I want to marry this girl. I want to indulge in sin. Zimri didn't say, I want to just have fun. Zimri said, I don't understand. Rabbi, is she permitted or forbidden? And if so, he came with an argument. But the argument was not because he cared. The argument was because he was looking to fight. And so when someone says, how could Israel go into Gaza? How could Israel bomb schools? How could Israel kill civilians? How could Israel... Are you talking to someone that's just looking for a justification to hate on Jews and to blame Jews? And they'll blame us no matter what. And if we go and rescue our hostages without telling the civilians nearby to evacuate first so they don't have a chance to kill our hostages before we get to them, and they'll ask on TV, why didn't Israel warn them to protect the innocent lives? So you know that you're not talking to someone that was looking for answers. And then the response has to be the way Pinchas responded. What's the Torah telling us? What's the response to Zimri's quote-unquote question? The response to Zimri's quote-unquote question was to grab a spear, to run into the tent, and kill them both as they're in the middle of the sin. Don't engage in dialogue with someone that wants to kill you. Don't engage in dialogue with someone that doesn't want to dialogue back. If the person is sincere, if the person truly wants to understand what's going on, and they're open to being educated, then as King Solomon says, you got to answer the fool with all of his foolishness. And you got to explain the history of Gaza and the history of when we disengaged in 2005 and how they fought against us before we were occupying the land. And how Hannah's great-grandfather was in Hebron in 1929 when there was a Hebron massacre, before there was a Jewish state. You can explain, and there's plenty to explain to justify why we're defending ourselves. But first, you need to make sure you're talking to someone who wants to hear what you're saying. You need to make sure you're talking to someone that's actually asking a question. If someone is asking an answer, if someone is asking a justification and a validation for their own hatred of Jews, then you don't respond. You don't engage. You don't even take them, you don't listen to them. Moshe doesn't respond to Zimri. The elders don't respond to Zimri. Pinchas doesn't respond to Zimri. I mean, he responds with action. He responds not with words, not with an answer to the question. He responds with a spear. He responds with a spear. And this is a very, very simple but truly important lesson for us. To not get discouraged or discombobulated and confused every time someone asks a question. Every time someone comes up with a new argument why Israel is evil and barbaric and inhumane and genocidal and whatever garbage they spew. Because we have to realize that they're asking not to ask. They're asking to argue.
The answer is never again.
There's no, you're right. The answer is never again. The answer, but it's not even like to tell, never again you can tell them, because never again is not an answer to the question. It's just like, this is the fact. We need an answer with yes, never again. That's a good answer, actually. It's I'm not engaging with you. I'm not considering you. I like to share the story. I've said it before, but it's a very powerful story that has a lot of relevance in general, in dialogue with people in general, but it fits for this situation as well. So there's a pretty famous NASA scientist. His name is Professor Velvel Green. He's from Minnesota. I've said this story before, but Velvel Green was not always religious. He was actually quite an intellectual. I mean, being a NASA scientist, he was on the team in NASA that was actually looking for life on Mars, and they were involved in the search for extraterrestrial life. And he spoke to the Rebbe about it, and he asked the Rebbe, if as a Jew, he should be looking for life on other planets. And the Rebbe actually thought about it for a few minutes, and the Rebbe said, for a Jew to say that there can't be life elsewhere would be limiting God, but that's not our objective. Anyway. So when he first started becoming religious, Rabbi Moshe Feller, should be healthy, was the one that was brought him close to Judaism, and they used to talk a lot, and he began to love Judaism. Whole story how he became religious. I think I said the story. He came to his office, and he was waiting a long time for the meeting. He waited a long time to get a meeting. He came and he waited like the waiting room for 2-3 hours for the meeting. I kept him waiting there. Finally, comes to this conference room for a 5-minute meeting. He comes to the conference room with his big windows. He sees that the sun's setting outside. In the waiting room, he didn't see there was no windows. He didn't realize. Before he had cell phones and whatever, he walked into the room, the conference room, sees the windows, sees the sun's about to green. He only has 5 minutes with. He said, I'm sorry, I got to pray mincha. I already have a pre-existing meeting with God. He turns around to the wall and starts to pray the afternoon prayer. And Professor Velvel Green almost blew a gasket. This guy's ready to come meet with me. Now he starts praying. He kicks him out of his office, whatever. He was very, very angry at him. And he runs to his phone and he calls his wife and he says to his wife, I found one. I found one. She said, what are you talking about? She said, I found a living one of those people from the Crusades. So what are you talking about? So basically, he was an active member of the Conservative Temple, and they had a book club. And they had read a book in the book club, a book about the Jews that were killed during the Crusades, who were willing to die for their Judaism. During the Crusades, if you know the history, the Christian Crusaders coming to liberate the whole land got a little distracted on the way. They came into all these towns along the Rhine River, and they would come to the Jews around the whole towns with a sword in one hand, the cross in the other, and say either kiss the cross or we'll kill you, or you kiss the sword. And tens upon hundreds of thousands of Jews gave up their lives and rather die than kiss the cross. They're willing to die rather than give up their life, rather than even for a moment to bow down to a cross and to kiss the cross and to give up on the Judaism. So at the book club, these secular Jews in Minnesota were discussing if such Jews even still exist today. Is there still Jews in the world, like in the times of the Crusades, in, the 1500s, in the Dark Ages, there were these very, very simple-minded, superstitious Jews that would die for God. But today, we're like intellectual, sophisticated, Jews that are much more wise than that. And no one in the book club would say that if someone said, kiss a cross or I'll kill you, they wouldn't kiss the cross. So they were wondering, does such a Jew even exist in the world? And now he just met one, a real living Martian, one of these old-fashioned Jews from a few hundred years ago, who is so committed to his Judaism that in the middle of a meeting with the famous NASA scientist would pray mincha. Says, I found one. So his wife says, where is he? So I kicked him out of my office. The guy was an idiot. He didn't want to talk to me. She said, you crazy? You kicked him out of the office. I want to meet him. So I had to call back. Rabbi fellow says, come to my house. My wife wants to meet you. Little did he know, by inviting the rabbi to his home, that'll be the beginning of the end. Come over. My wife wants to ask you some questions. And I don't know, they sat the whole night and the next night, and I'm saying, and anyway, so he became enamored with Judaism. He loved Judaism. He's learning and learning and learning. The only thing that bothered him was he was a scientist. And in his mind, Judaism and science are not compatible. Judaism and science, Judaism is beautiful. The values, the teachings, the love, Shabbos, prayer. But scientific ideas and Torah, like the age of the world, these things, they're not compatible. So Professor Rabbi Feller was not the right person to engage in scientific debate with a NASA scientist. Rabbi Feller is a yeshiva student. But the Rebbe is a college graduate. He was in Sorbonne University, the Rebbe. He studied in Berlin. I'm saying the Rebbe was in Paris. The Rebbe knew science. He was a genius. He worked in the Navy Yard. So he told Professor, write all your questions to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is a scientist. The Rebbe can answer you. So he wrote long letter, many questions. And the Rebbe never answered his questions. As if he responded to the letter, ignored all the questions as if he never asked the questions. Which didn't really bother Professor Green that much, because he figured, okay, the Rebbe is a holy rabbi. He knows a lot of Torah, a lot of Talmud, a lot of wisdom, a lot of Hasidus. Doesn't know science. So my questions were over his head. He didn't have the answers, so it didn't bother him. He was okay with that. The Rebbe didn't have the answers to these questions. And eventually he became Shomer Shabbos. He became religious. And finally he comes to meet the Rebbe. He comes into a private meeting with the Rebbe. It's already after 10 years, however many years of being involved with Chabad and learning and studying and already changing his whole lifestyle and keeping kosher, everything. He's religious. Comes into Yechidus, and the Rebbe starts to answer all of his questions that he had 10 years earlier. I don't know if it's 10 years. I don't know the exact number of years, but many, many years earlier, when he first started his religious journey, all of his scientific questions, the Rebbe is answering now with brilliant, brilliant answers. And the Rebbe knew science, and the Rebbe was brilliant. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. And he was blown away by the Rebbe's answers. So finally, after the Rebbe explained to him so clearly and so brilliantly how it's not a contradiction, so he says to the Rebbe, I don't understand. If you knew all this, why didn't you respond to me so many years ago? And I thought that you were an idiot without science. It's a good question, right? If you knew the answer, why didn't you tell me? So the Rebbe told him, if I would have answered you then, I would have won the battle, but I would have lost the war. Understand? I may have proved to you that I have an answer to you, but I would have lost the war. You weren't ready for the answers then in your spiritual journey. At that point in your journey, you had to still be able to compartmentalize religion and science. Now you're at a point where you can see the harmony and the synergy between them. You weren't ready for it at that point. The point is, many rabbis, many people, we have a tendency to jump to answer the question, especially if we know the answer. You're asking, how come Israel, don't you know that they have our hostages there? Don't you know that they invaded us first? Don't you know? Didn't you see the video? It's so odd. We feel like the need to answer. We have the answers. We feel the need to answer. Just because you have the answers doesn't mean you have to answer. Who's asking the question? What question? At what point are they asking the question? In what state of mind are they asking the question? What's their emotional state right now? So maybe the question is easy to answer, but at this moment in their lives, at this moment with their emotional state, you're not going to be very effective, and actually the answer will be very, very hard to give. Now, of course, this is true for every one of us and every one of our interactions and relationships. With any time we're in a dialogue with someone that's asking us questions, to be able to understand, why is our child asking us? Why is our husband? Why is our friend asking? Why? To be able to answer the questioner, not the question. This is true on the global scale. When the Jewish people are being questioned, to know what's a question and what's an attack. What's a question that we don't answer to, we don't engage in, we don't respond to, we just take the spear and do what we got to do. And that's the story, my friends. Story for us from Zimri, and the question that did not need to be answered. Okay.
So how did the tribe of Shimon respond to that?
Say what?
How did the tribe of Shimon respond to it?
Oh, so for the tribe of Shimon, I think I said there was, I didn't say, there was never another great rabbi. From all the tribes produced great leaders, except for the tribe of Shimon. Thank you, Carmen, for the applause. Look at that. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Darlene. Thank you, Art. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Prima. Look, all these are so nice. Lori, thank you. Thank you. I can't keep track on the. Okay, Lori, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed. And Don, you should be healthy. B'ezrat Hashem, with blessings and good things. Good evening, Steve. That's the story, yeah?
So there was never a great tribe that came from the tribe.
Tribe of Shimon did not produce leaders. They were punished. They were eternally punished, but they remained a tribe that never produced great leaders. Every tribe produced great leaders except for them. Stand? Any question? I should have said any question is a good question, except the question that we use an excuse to do nothing. That's the answer, my friend. Okay. Laila Tov, any comments? Next week, same time, same space, same channel. No idea what we'll learn yet, but I'm sure we'll find something beautiful and inspiring. B'ezrat Hashem. What? Same channel, same speaker, different jokes, different subject. Okay, thank you, Jacob Miller. What? And thank you, Christina. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you're watching, say good night. Hope you all enjoyed. Laila Tov. Darlene, I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I'll see you, God willing, next Monday night, same time, 8 p.m. Yes. Question, do you want the answer? Just same channel. Yes. Okay, Laila Tov, 1 second. We'll say good night to everyone here. And good night, everyone over here.